Hello and welcome to the Cubicle Liberation Podcast. This episode is about long-term planning. It's bullshit and important. I'm here with Joshua Fletcher, my good friend. How you doing, Josh?
I am great today. I'm excited to dive into this topic. We got a lot of stuff that I think will help a lot of people in hopefully impactful ways.
Yeah, and there's sort of some contrarian points here that I think have some validity. At least there's some truth behind them, but I think that sometimes it kind of misses. It allows people to kind of dismiss long-term planning kind of out of hand, and even if it can be extremely helpful for them. Fletch was saying that you could have processes loaded with failure conditions. Do you want to elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, yeah, like one of the things that as we talked off camera right before we went live, that came to mind is that I did not plan to be an online marketer or do what I do, whatever you want to call that, right? You can call it that. It's fully appropriate. But when I was doing geographic information systems in college, so to speak, I say not so to speak. That was one of the programs I was in. I had no way of it was not a plan to then really understand the maps and geostatistics, right? That was not even like really a thing in 2001 when I was studying this stuff. So what we're gonna hope to do with this, one of the things I want to hope to do is to help you understand how you can have an actual long-term plan. You can work toward building blocks that can put you in a better situation for when these things come up in your life. And I think that's really what long-term planning is about, because we've got this vision of like, I love the backdrop you've got on the screen share. It's all these like beautiful places. And it's like, okay, I want to be at this beautiful place. So this is really about engineering conditions in your life and your mind such that when you're at these beautiful places, you can actually enjoy it. Because there's probably somebody that lives over here off screen that may not be like the epitome of enjoying where they
They may
are
not
and where they live.
appreciate their paradise.
Yeah.
Speaking of engineering, this is part of kind of my long-term plan, is that I look at things that I want to do. I want to go to this place, and so it helps me stay focused on what's important. It gives me initiative and drive to be like, okay, why am I going to work hard today? Oh, so that I can go visit this awesome place.
And so here's one of the really cool things that comes out of like that, like thinking like, why do we want to go to these places? Because you get to a place like this and the world looks different. Like everything looks different. And so
It's gorgeous.
my long-term plan, I've got an idea to go. I don't know where this is. It might be Norway or something like that. I don't know. But could be
New Zealand, Colorado. I don't
it could
know.
be a lot of different places. I don't even know, but it's like beautiful. What I do know is that when I get there, the world will look different. Feel different.
And feel different.
And so it's like I've got a plan to experience something that I can't even imagine yet.
Yeah.
I just have this inkling that when I get there, things will be I say better, like really better and different. So
there it can be a process filled with bullshit, especially if you kind of have like some garbage in, garbage out. A lot of people, they build a plan and they don't end up sticking to it, and they're fine with that. That doesn't mean that the plan wasn't valuable. There's a lot of businesses, they create like a yearly plan and then they switch a lot of things up. I doubt that many businesses, change, every year, change like the whole main focus of the business, but there's probably going to be some details that just don't work out exactly as they want.
You brought this up on the last time we actually spoke, but it wasn't a podcast that we recorded that we've released yet. I think we're actually maybe thinking about doing that. But you talked about Texas Instruments, right? TI that you used to work for. So it's a company that right now my association with them is, TI 85. I got,
in reality, that's a very tiny percentage of their business. Most of their business is making semiconductors and processors. They got processors in a lot of cars and a lot of phones. Like not the main processor, but a lot of like in a car right now. I don't know. A modern car probably has hundreds of processors in it. Little processors. It's different than the processor that goes in like a computer, your CPU, but it's still kind of the same basic thing.
A little more simple. But where did they start though?
Yeah, I think I want to say they were formed somewhere early 1900s, and they were an oil and gas company. And so there's no oil and gas right now. So their initial plan, I think they made money, but they had to pivot at some point. I believe it was helpful they had an engineer. I believe he gets credit for Jack Kilby. Kilby. It's got to be Kilby.
You can look it up. Yeah.
Yeah, for inventing like the first of some type of processor. He was like one of the inventors of that. And so I think that kind of they had a lot of IP that they could take advantage of.
Yeah.
In that situation.
And so like playing off that, like, so what they were able to do is be successful by putting things in place, building blocks, right? They had an audience, they had processors, they had inventory and money and relationships that then they could build. So we talk about pivot, right? Pivot's big. 2020, everybody's trying to pivot. Well, how do you pivot effectively? You got to see the direction, but you've also got to have a certain amount of stuff that you've built on that lets you effectively bring that whomp over to the new direction that you're going to head.
Yeah.
And so that we want to kind of uncover that and unpack that a little bit today as well.
Yeah. And it could also be bullshit just because you don't know where you're going. Like you don't, especially when you're first getting started, there's so much unknown. But again, that doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. And the planning, I think, is super, super valuable. It helped me a lot. I'm going to go into sort of my long-term planning.
Yeah. Start with that. That'd be good.
Okay. I had it down here lower. I can jump to it. So like with regards to Dallas SEO Geek, my business when I first got started was very different than what it is now. My initial plan was not that good, and I stuck with it for probably about 6 months, and then I made a significant pivot. It wasn't like a completely different plan, but it was kind of narrowing my focus on the parts of the plan. So I was trying a wide range of things initially, and then I was like, oh, these things I don't like, and this thing I think has a lot better future to scale and to grow to a reasonable sized business where I could support my family. And so I focused on that, which was SEO, as opposed to kind of more broad digital marketing, which, social media, pay-per-click. I was trying to sell like all that stuff. And my business really, really took off pretty much immediately after I decided to focus on SEO. I'd already liked SEO and I'd been doing it for a while, and it was already a significant focus, but I focused to the degree of eliminating the other things. And this was an intentional planning decision that I made. And it opened up a lot of doors in a lot of ways.
So one of the things you said there that I think is key, right? Things took off when you said no to a lot of stuff, right? Because like with focus, focus is singular. You have to focus on a single thing. You can have priorities, and priorities is really about the long-term plan. Like, okay, I want to be at a place where I can, when I'm at this place, I'm really enjoying it. Okay. So if you've got a significant other and you're at this place, well, if your relationship is junk, you're not going to be able to fully embrace and have an experience with that person or people. Right. I've got 3 kids and a wife. When I go to whatever this location is that's on the backdrop or any of these other ones, to make sure that that's in place, I will have had to say no to way more than I said yes to.
Yeah.
Which was no to all the other girls I could have wound up connected with and in a relationship with. I will have had to say no to thousands upon thousands of business opportunities. I will have had to say no to a lot of things that I thought I was going to be doing to make money, even going back to kind of origin story. If you watch the initial podcast, like thinking I was going to be an athlete and all this kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so it's not really about, so I just really want to draw down on, there are likely a lot of paths that everyone can take that can get you in the right place, but it will require you to be able to say no to a lot of things.
Yeah.
And so what's the nature of being able to say no?
Well, I think it helps to have when you have a plan, you can know that, okay, I'm actually focusing on this thing that I think is better. Because there's a lot of good things you could do, but sometimes you have to say, okay, well, this one is better. So no knocking people who sell social media marketing or pay-per-click.
Right.
That may work for them.
Do great with that. Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And in fact, for me personally, I didn't see it as being the most profitable use of my time. Personally, right. I think just SEO has fit me. And so And this is where you can get a lot of like more bullshit from false positive cases. There's a lot of people who go about, maybe they don't plan, maybe things just fall in place for them. There is, I don't think people are inherently lucky, but I think there's chance in the world, and it's hard to not say that. So a lot of people can get the right results with the wrong processes. And to me, I try to focus on the processes and not try to be too enamored or downtrodden by any specific like one or two cases that people present. And so so again, it's kind of bullshit, but it's still important. And this is a point you wanted to make about you can be wrong about what's true. You want to talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. How long should I talk about it? Okay, so
4 minutes.
4 minutes. Okay, start the timer. So one of the things I realized at the age of 25 or so, I'm currently 21 years past that date, was that the plan I had and what I was working at doing, which was being a professional athlete, earning money with that, and that being something that was everything I was putting all of my effort into.
Mm-hmm.
It did not work. And I say it didn't work. It actually did work, but I got to a place where I was like, no, this is not how I want to spend my life. So, a little bit of a, go back to talking about a little bit of that. I had a close friend of mine die on the football field. And then 2 days later, I'll just say I broke my leg. It was a really big injury that I recovered from, and I was able then to actually, I could have played again after that. But that experience helped me see that what I was doing was loaded with massive risk. It wasn't that I wasn't physically capable. It wasn't that I wasn't mentally capable. It was that I questioned what it was that made me believe at an early age that was what I should be spending my time on. And it took a while. You can call it drifting or hopping around or looking at other things. I've had different periods in my life where I achieved what I think many people would call a lot of success, and other people might look at as just like, what in the world are you doing? So, from that perspective, which is mine and my personal experience on these elements, you can. So when I walked away from that, I said, no, I'm not going to play anymore. I'm going to go play. Not football,
in a different way,
other things. I'm gonna play and see what comes from that. What I had was so many building blocks. I understood team. I understood motivation. I understood performance. I understood practice. I understood making sure my body was capable of doing the things necessary to fulfill, so to speak, what I'd been tasked with, my job, so to speak. And so that whole plan was not something that really I achieved, but I was able to then change the plan, change the aim, because my real aim was to enjoy life and do more good, true, important stuff with my time and effort. So regardless of the plan, like we call this a cubicle liberation podcast. A lot of people are in jobs that we're kind of, talking to, or we all have jobs regardless. David and I both have jobs, meaning there are things we have to do. It's just that not someone else is not necessarily dictating what those are. And so what that gives you then is the freedom and flexibility and responsibility to be able to think properly about where you allocate your time and resources.
Yeah, and I think that one of the kind of conclusions that we can make about this, about, because you can be wrong about what's true. I mean, you have to accept that. That's just a part of being human. And one of the implications of that is that you should consistently work on building your understanding. And part of the initial processes for me when I first quit my job was I knew I had a plan, and I believed in myself, but I didn't know exactly where I was going to go. And I worked on just kind of poking around a lot and trying to build understanding and experience and skills and assets, not quite as intentionally as I do now, but in a lot of ways I was doing a lot of poking around, trying to understand what things are, what not just what works, but also understanding yourself, what you want. Because I don't think you're saying no one should ever play football. You're just saying it didn't make sense for you, and you figured out, hey, some of your assumptions on what is going to be a good life for you, you were questioning those, and you decided that they were not, basically not, at least had some untruth in them.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yeah. No, it's absolutely correct. You know, as I think back and then can kind of extrapolate, we are results of our environment, right? And that environment includes your genetics and, you know, kind of your personality and everything else, but really how you grew up, what you saw. And I think that's really one of the reasons that podcasts and YouTube have taken off, because it lets you see things that you would not have seen in the 1800s, when your environment was really you were going to be completely limited by your environment as to what you saw and were aware of.
Oh yeah.
And
Well,
so one of the big things that I think Dave and I both agree on, even though we haven't explicitly talked about it, is that we want to help people understand that there are things that they probably have not yet experienced that they are fully capable of doing well.
yes.
And so these are just
Yeah.
new things that we want to help bring people who grew up and live and have lived in environments where they were not exposed to that.
Yeah. And so in building understanding, I think helps you find those places, those failure points, those failure conditions, and reduce their effectiveness, sort of, or maybe even completely remove them. So let's move on. So the next kind of section is sort of like why focus on that. And we cover a lot of these. We kind of go back and forth. Just want to make sure these bullet points are here to make sure we don't miss some points that we thought would be important. For me, like I try to think like, well, what kind of life do I want to live? And I guess you could be there's plenty of people who live reasonable lives who just kind of go with the flow, and there's never a goal. They just kind of are on a ship without a rudder, and they're just floating in the ocean, and they come across a private island, you know, maybe with that's awesome, whatever. But for the most part, I think that that's not a recipe for success. And for me personally, I want to live a great life. I'm pretty sure I only live one life, and so I have kind of life goals, and that's kind of where I start. It's more of a personal thing than it is a business thing, but also there's some business things. It's more of like accomplishment things. What do I want to accomplish? And I work backwards from there, and that is, by doing that, it's strange, by having a destination, I'm much more likely to arrive at a place that I really want to be, than if I just kind of like go with the flow. Now, I went with the flow a lot in my life, and it was not too terrible, but I think I was kind of on a pretty cush path for a lot of my life. Things just kind of came easily to me. I'm just a pretty fortunate guy in that way. But you know, if you have life goals, then you should have some long-term planning. And long-term, let me maybe define that. That can be anything from your whole life to maybe planning like the next year or even like the next month. Just kind of all planning along that scale, but really looking ahead in the future and trying to design your life or your environment to where you want to be. So yeah, and any points you want to make on that, Fletch?
Well, you know, yeah, sure. So one of the things I have tended to do is to realize that we've got ideas about things we want, and whether it's a car, a new house, or living in a location, or being able to have a great relationship or whatever, like you can boil it down into categories. And I think categories are very important because you can start to, with categories, you can start to orient and know that if you've got your health, if you've got wealth, and I'm not saying wealth specifically with money, but money is a very good proxy for wealth. Wealth can also mean knowledge and understanding. So you talked about somebody hopping
Relationships
around.
could be wealth.
Well, relationships I would classify as a different category, but
Okay.
But regardless, so health, wealth, relationships. These are three important things to every single human, because what they let you do, each of them, what each of those let you do is to enjoy your day, your time, your minute, whatever it might be. If you've got things that you struggle with, you're going to be able to boil it down to one of those three things. Right. So, okay, now those are the things I need to make sure I have in place, right, to be able to enjoy any of whatever I'm doing. Right. So if I'm healthy, even if I'm not $10 million in the bank, if I'm healthy and I've got some wealth as far as my experience and what I can bring to the table, I can trade value and get some of the money I need to live. Right. And it mostly takes money. I've got a whole different concept with how to go about success. Right. I say whole different. It's one that I built because money is not real. There's currently not any non-fiat currency in the world, right? So what that leads to is needing to understand value as the foundation of
Value is real.
what you've got. Value is real. So what you want to do is build value. Value is the real underlying concept of wealth.
Yeah.
So as long as you're building value, you are building wealth. So what value do you need to build and as a building block that you will then be able to trade for currency that will let you acquire some other things. But that, again, that's the trade of value.
And I think that's a great goal,
is
to become more valuable, be valuable in specific ways. So I chose intentionally to narrow my personal focus to be valuable at SEO and to be less valuable at other things intentionally.
Well, but one of the things that is valuable is currency. So if you're in a situation where you've got a lot of currency, well, that by default is actually something people are willing to trade their value for to get your currency, and then everybody's happy. It's a good trade, right? So understanding that, again, seeking understanding these things more properly. So health, value, and relationships is maybe a better way of phrasing that. Although I wanted to use wealth just because it's a good proxy for it.
If you kind of like run a bunch of simulations, there's a lot of randomness in individual case studies, but in terms of if you are more valuable, typically you're going to have more wealth. If you're more valuable, to make yourself more valuable to other people effectively, because you need other people to make money. And so, so I think that's should be a critical part of your plan. How am I going to build my value? How am I going to build my wealth? This is a business kind of focused podcast, but at the same time, having the relationship goals and the health goals, I think, are important as well. Because if you don't have your health, I mean, if you're dead, there's not much you can do, as far as I can tell.
Well, something might happen after that. I can't be certain of it, but it would make sense.
Incapacitated
after it, but
due to your health.
But again, once you start, if you do start over, right? If you believe in the reincarnation or afterlife or whatever you want to call it, like, consider what you believe you might take with you. There might be some elements of value, but really it's like making sure you're building value is huge. It is almost singularly important as long as you stay alive, because with value, and I say value because it's value, not currency or wealth, you can really build great relationships as well.
It helps. Yeah, it
One of
certainly
the
helps.
things that's going to help attract people to you, that you're going to be able to trade and come into an agreement with and get into a good relationship where you each are bringing value to the table that the other person not only values but respects, and they're also trading with you in that regard. So value, like we talk about long-term planning, if value is not the consideration that is helping you drive toward whatever vision you have, you're missing an element that may really put your plan in jeopardy.
Agreed. Yeah. I mean, you got to be valuable again from the business standpoint. I mean, ultimately, you can have there are some successful turd polishing businesses that they have very low value, but they still make money. But for the most part, by building value, you dramatically increase the chances of being successful. But also in a relationship, and not from a transactional standpoint, but if you're trying to find a maid, or even for your kids, being valuable to your kids, I think is something that for me personally is a goal. And I think you should at least consider sort of the social aspect of that, and the health, build value into your health. When you eat healthy, or you get exercise, that's building value in that way, I think. Although I know you're kind of narrowing it into the wealth. Maybe I went a little too far off there.
No, not at all, because that lets me maybe, I guess, riff on a little bit, is that if you've got a ton of value, but you've got something in there that's a contradiction, that's a failure condition that causes problems, you can have all the wealth in the world and still die early.
Yep.
Okay. So you can have all the wealth in the world and still not have money because there's something that you've got. And so when I look at long-term planning, it's really about eliminating failure conditions until I succeed.
Sure.
So while
if you identify that ahead of time,
yeah,
it enables you to avoid it easier.
Yeah, building is really the iterative process of stacking value and being able to have things you can trade for things you want to have. But if you have not eliminated that kind of bad seed, that bad that poison that potentially takes you out, like you might be great looking and tall
Well,
and
thank you.
fit and all these kinds of things. I'm talking about David specifically.
But
now I have to break.
Stop it.
I'll insult him. But if you're an a-hole, you might not wind up with the best relationship. That's why I had to break. You're the one who tried to claim this, so you bit off.
I'm just having fun here.
Bit it off. I know, me too.
Yeah.
But so anyway, so you've got to look at not just building value and understanding what your plan is, but making sure that your plan does not have something in it that is going to be that can take you out, or that
take your value out.
That can take your value out and make it almost where you're then going to have to rely more on luck to somebody to get into some sort of relationship, right? And in a relationship, you talk about wealth. You're not going to have wealth without you're not going to be able to have wealth without relationships, because you have to trade value to get wealth.
Yeah.
Period. Right.
And yeah, there was a point. Yeah. Okay. Let's move on. Because I do have a hard stop today. Let's see. You're looking to arrive at and become a different place and person. And so from where you are now, it's kind of two different things. And so it's absolutely critical that you create a plan. Again, if you're trying to like drive somewhere and you just get in the car and start driving, and without actually like putting it into the maps where you need to go, it's going to be much less likely that you actually arrive at that destination. And so having some plan, even if there's some traffic and you need a detour, that's fine. But if you have a plan at first, it's going to make it a much better for you to really, a lot of this is about, at least for me personally, it was a lot about becoming a different person. I needed to change, not fundamentally who I was, but like my habits, some of my beliefs, some of my ideas, some of my concepts, some of my misunderstandings. I had to change who I was, and having a plan in place, even though the initial plan when I first quit wasn't great, it was still helpful in me getting to where I needed to get, to building some assets and to building some understanding and to poking around and finding some things out, so that when I came around to build another plan, because I've done this many times, it was a better plan. And it was iteratively better, and I had some assets and I had some things that I could leverage to make that even stronger. So
Yeah. Well, so one of the things is, I think maybe a helpful metaphor analogy. I confuse those two terms and what they mean, but it's a proxy for looking at how you operate. So with a car, say I want to go to Redwoods National Park, and because I've got this idea that I want to go see the redwoods, I want to stand in that forest, I want my kids to see it. Well, you could fly there. I don't really like that because I like the road, so to speak. So I need a vehicle that is capable and fuel.
mm,
And in all likelihood, I say in all likelihood because I've done this enough to know that there's a lot that happens on that road, that some of the best experiences have been on the way to what I thought was the goal.
mm,
And some of those so much so that the goal then was like completely changed, in that, hey, we were going to go to whatever location, and along the road we went through a place where I was like, and everyone was like, oh, this is where we want to be.
yeah, that's a
Let's
good point. But you still needed the car and the initial plan
So
to
those
find.
are the building blocks again. Those are the
Yeah,
things necessary. And so really focusing on building blocks that are valuable and capable to get you on the journey. And so this is why I think it's important to have long-term planning, because without that goal, we wouldn't have gone through this thing that I was like, this is where we're like almost stopping, right? This is,
mm-hmm.
we've achieved the thing, because what we have is like this idea of, when I get there, I'm going to have everything I want.
Yeah,
And a lot of times what happens is that before you get there, you're going to realize you have everything you want and more than you would have imagined before. And so that's why I'm like, my goal is to get to a place that I cannot imagine yet.
yeah,
Like that really is my long-term plan, is to achieve and then continue to do that iterative process again and again and again, to get to places that I've not yet imagined. And so this kind of goes back to, like GIS, which is one of the things I studied in graduate school.
what is that again? What does GIS
So
stand for?
GIS stands for Geographic Information Systems.
Okay,
And
continue
so it's
please.
it's databases and maps. And so it's information about land and points of interest and all that type of thing. And a lot comes from that. It specifically about cubicle liberation. It's how Google Maps ranks things. Okay. So the underlying technology is based in GIS.
Mm.
So when I was studying that, I had no concept that well, at the time there was not Google Maps. So,
Mm.
what I happened to be doing, which I liked maps and I liked, I was fond of technology and being able to kind of do things that were represented then on a screen. It had nothing to do with understanding maps more properly, because maps were not even a thing then. So I actually landed at a place where, I say landed, now I'm at a place that I could not have imagined when I had that, I guess, goal to uh, establish an understanding of that value block of how geostatistics work. So, in 10 years, that may then be like the picture that's up there right now. There's a wind farm on that ridge. That's what I did with my GIS, right? I was a renewable energy developer, a consultant for, who determined the feasibility of wind farms and solar, industrial scale solar facilities, right? And so that was information about land. Well, that's the exact same technology that I use now to rank somebody in maps, rank myself in maps. And
That's
and
funny.
so like I had the goal to understand it, but I didn't know what it was going to be applied to. And so thinking that I know what 10 years from now is going to be the most useful way to apply that value is it's naive on my part if I continue to
Well, it's
believe.
rife with error. Like
Yeah.
there's a lot of failure points
Yeah.
where you could be wrong. I mean, try to predict what technology would be like in 20 years. And you just like, you're going to be wrong about a lot of things. There's just
Yeah,
kind
and
of
where
no
the
way
world
around it.
is. Like who
Yeah.
saw 2020 being the way it has been, right? With the COVID and
Right.
the
Exactly.
lockdown and the protests and the riots and all that kind of, like, you could say
Nobody
you
did.
saw it, but if you were prepared, I say prepared, meaning you had stuff built where your life was cool, right? You've got your food, you've got your shelter, you've got your energy that you need to stay heated and cooled and cook. Well, all this stuff is not necessarily good, but it may not have, wiped you out. And so, having
Yeah.
a stable base is really, and understanding things from that perspective, which is why I don't necessarily recommend people quit their job until they've got a stable base in place to do something very different.
Yeah.
I did that, but I wasn't in a stable base anyway. So I
Right.
wasn't like trading security for this big risk. I I really didn't have any security at all. So it was quite easy.
Yeah. And I consider, so made some big planning decisions a few years ago that are paying off this year. And I stuck with the plan kind of for the most part, some of the major decisions, and 2020 is going to be my best year ever. Because part of it I think is a little bit fortunate just in the nature of what has happened with the pandemic and the fact that we work online or we work with people searching on the internet. Well, that's not going away. And in fact, it's, in some ways potentially more. And so it kind of fortunate that way. But at the same time, I was, kind of intentionally picking something more technologically focused and more future focused, that I thought, I think people are going to be searching the internet forever, for hundreds of years, if not longer, if not, for as long as we're around. I mean, we're gonna have electricity, we're gonna have plumbing, etc. And so, making sure that, I didn't know exactly what the exact destination was like, but I had sort of some major priorities and areas where I thought I could build value, that I focused on and tried to gather wins. Let's kind of skip ahead here, like, because this is one of the biggest kind of simplest things that you can focus on in terms of building a business. I focused on building my assets, my skills, and my relationships. And you don't need a lot of really big wins for this to work out in your favor. If you just become really good at one valuable skill, that can be enough to set you up for life. There's plenty of people who do a handful of things. They have a handful of wins in their entire life and they live a great life based upon just that. So, something like that is going to be important for you to at least consider. And like you're talking about building blocks, each one of these is basically one of the major categories you could do, set up for a building block. So incorporate this into your plan. What sort of assets do I want to build? What sort of skills do I want to build? What sort of relationships do I want to build? Especially, I think that I would focus heavily on the skills department, and the other two are still important, but they kind of fall from those. So I would kind of, for me personally, I would start with what skills I wanted to do, and for me, it was SEO. And I think that was a prudent decision, even in even without knowing of there being a pandemic. But with a pandemic, I think it is borne out to be a pretty good decision, long-term planning decision. So, okay, we do need to move on. Let's see. So I'm just going to mention a few things right here real quick, and then we're going to go down to kind of more of kind of the, like, how to do it. So there's all these studies on people with plans and goals versus not, and how successful they are. And just like overall, just in all the objective metrics that you can take, the plan, when you plan, and have goals, essentially, it just makes a huge, huge difference. Fletch is now transformed into a younger version of himself. He's the lesser known of Magnum PI's partners. Okay, so mustache jokes aside, and we mentioned this before. If you you can build a business you don't want. that you hate. There's plenty of people that do this. They make a lot of money, but they hate their business, and it kind of warps their life. So that's another thing to think about. Well, like what are some of the implications of if I'm actually successful in some of the objectives that you have? Maybe that actually won't be good. Maybe that won't be something that will be enjoyable or pleasant for you. And that'd be typically, you're looking for like this. I would consider that to be kind of a failure condition, even if you're in a lot of ways you're succeeding. And we mentioned the understanding with long-term building the understanding. It's just a critical part of life, I think, in general, but also long-term planning helps in that process. We're gonna do a whole other pod on like if you're in the matrix and how to escape the matrix. And Fletch has a social psych background. Oh, he's back. Okay.
Yeah.
And so I think we've alluded to this a lot. So I don't know if Fletch wants to come back to it at some point, we can. But I do want to get into this. I really want to get into kind of some of the specifics of, okay, so now, what exactly do you do? And I know we'll be able to tie some of these things back into here. Okay, so you're sitting here, maybe you've got a job, a day job, and you like really don't want a day job, or you've got a business that you're trying to get off the ground, or you just need some new thoughts on how to move forward with your life. I think this is going to be a little bit more narrow focus on exactly, okay, so what do we do? So again, the building the assets, the skills, and the relationships. For me, like Dallas SEO Geek, I did focus heavily on for a long time. I want to rank number 1 for Dallas SEO. So there are some things in the future that you can kind of know, you can kind of have a pretty good understanding of what it's going to be like, at least in terms of, but there were still some things that I didn't know about that, because now there's maps is a bigger part of that. And so it kind of means something a little bit different. But at the same time, I identified that as something that could be super valuable to my business in a lot of different ways. It required me to build certain skills and some relationships in order to get to that point. But by getting that's been so valuable to me. That's one of the best decisions I ever made, and sticking to it. So being consistent about it is important. I didn't do it every day, but I also didn't like ignore it for super long periods of time. And that was an asset. That's a huge asset now. Even if like, so the ranking kind of comes and goes sometimes. I think right now I've fallen a little bit. I'm kind of cleaning up some of my links, but it's still an asset I have, because I have ranked number 1. I can say that for long periods of time. For years, I was number 1, and it brought in money. It was good. It was good for my business. And so that was part of my long-term plan. Any further thoughts on building assets, skills, and relationships?
Well, so like even within that, that second bullet that you've got below that. So for people who are just only listening, right? So we're talking about building assets, skills, and relationships, objectives, and priorities. I really look at really trying to organize my lifelong priorities. So that really comes down to importance. Like what David talks about, Dallas SEO, and I'm in Phoenix. That was something I did. It was not. I didn't do it as an objective to gain business immediately. I did it so I say I don't want to. I don't want this to come across wrong. So I'll try to talk about it a little more maybe than I need to, but I literally built a website and ranked it for Phoenix SEO, Phoenix SEO agency, Phoenix SEO services, and like 40 other terms. And I was number 1 for all of those terms and in the maps, as a way to demonstrate. It was a demonstration website that I was then. So I was not really looking at building an agency. That was something that just, upon doing that, we had lots of calls coming in, right? But I was doing that as a way to help other people understand SEO, right? It was like a demonstration website that I put together, and the byproduct of doing that, right? Of building that skill, and then the implementation of that skill in a way other people could see, resulted in stuff that I had not intended to necessarily have from applying something that was very valuable. So actually doing something with what can open opportunities for you that you may not have originally intended.
Yep.
That are still great. Like the money that came from me doing that. And this is, 6 years now, page one for the big terms. And unlike David, I did not pay attention to it because it was a website that I could jump into the back end of and show people on webinars. Okay, this is what I put in place on this page. These are, the factors I had in place as far as signals go for a search engine to understand what this page is about. And these are the factors off of this page that I put in place to make sure that search engines understood that this was an important page, right? The strength, so to speak, of that influence. And so applying it's not really applying yourself, because like one of the things I will rarely tell somebody is to work harder, right? I also try to not tell somebody to work smarter, because that would mean you're working dumb, and that's not really what people do either. But it really becomes about understanding a better, an alternative and more productive way of applying what you know, is to apply the value you already have to create more opportunities for relationships where you can trade value.
Yeah. And speaking of that, that actually leads to, so once I was ranking with Dallas SEO Geek, now I could go and I sold products on telling people how I did that, and how I sold to these clients. And so it was like, with one asset, you become you're in a stronger position to win more assets. It's a little bit like you're on a battlefield. This is not very accurate, but you're on a battlefield and you get a special weapon. You kill some guy to get a special weapon. Now you can kill more guys, right? and then get more special weapons. It's a little bit like that. Although it's not really competitive based, it's more of an internal battle. The more understandings you get, the more assets you get, the more skills you get, the better your skills are, the better things are going to go for you. And I want to make some distinctions. I like the objectives and priorities. A lot of my individual, like day-to-day stuff, priorities are a huge influence on that, because you make a lot of little decisions, and really understanding, okay, what's really important here, is what the priorities are. And the objectives kind of drive the priorities. So the objectives are more like, okay, rank number one for Dallas SEO. Okay, so what does that change for my priorities? Okay, well, so working on the SEO for Dallas SEO Geek is a priority, or building my SEO skills is a priority. And that's something that I should not lose sight of. And so by organizing, spending time with my family is a priority. And so that's why priorities are important, because you can't do everything. You only have so much time to do stuff and to be. And so you have to, you're already making priorities, whether you're doing it intentionally or not. You're already kind of assigning priorities in your life. So
yeah, that's big, is to help people realize that you're already doing this, but helping identify it and clarify it, so it's like really stark contrast with everything else. It's like, okay, now I can organize what I'm spending my focus on and immersion on more appropriately to gain more power, so to speak, right? And I say power, not like you're going to try to force someone else to do something, but you've actually built something that someone else wants to trade whatever they have with you for. So it was something that a guy, Mike Long, who Dave and I both know, kind of coined, build or beg. And if you don't have something you've built, you cannot trade. And if you cannot trade, you have to beg.
Yep.
So you really, 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 really,
really
want to focus on building. Yeah, really.
Building right from the beginning. Building. And
period.
That's going to be
wherever you are right this second. If you're listening to this, you want to build, period.
Well, hopefully you're building understanding, and then hopefully you build a long-term plan.
Yeah. So then that begs the question, what do I build? Right. Okay. So
I'd say start with a long-term plan.
Build.
Yeah. I think this is a great place to start. And it's something you come back to on a regular basis. Here's another thing that I think is important, to be aware of the vectors in your life. And so what are vectors? Vectors are sort of they're kind of numerical directional, like in physics, this is forces. So if you have two forces going in opposite directions, then you don't get anything. You want to turn those around, you have two forces
net
going
zero.
in the right, you going in at least similar directions. And so, maybe, for example, if you're a huge priority of yours is to be always there for your kids, but then you want to, you plan on building a business that requires you to travel all over the world all the time. Maybe you can take your kids with you, maybe you can't. And so maybe those vectors aren't aligned. For me, in my business, a lot of times I had to look at, like, okay, some of these vectors, when I look at it, okay, this actually doesn't really jive with some of these other priorities that I have. And then there's another vector I can see, oh, it amplifies what I am doing over here. And that is something that is important, that for me, I found it to be very important to identify, and it affects my priorities. So for example, I identified that Maps SEO is central to three core parts of my business. There's three main parts that I make money with: client SEO, selling information to other people trying to do client SEO, and then I do lead generation. Maps SEO is in all of those. And so by building my Maps SEO skills, by building my assets via case studies, then I am amplifying the growth of my business exponentially, as opposed to just, meeting something that only kind of fits into one groove, or, moving away from doing other things that have nothing to do with Maps SEO. That's kind of an opposite vectors. And you can, you're naturally going to have, your vectors are not going to be all completely aligned, but trying to really make sure you don't have the opposite vectors, because, you can go 2 steps forward and 2 steps back, and then you're still at the same place.
Yeah. One of the things, like, talk about the podcast, right? So, like, Dave and I are each doing this because we realize that there's a big overall vector where the internet is becoming more important to a lot of people in one way, shape, or form. So having more, I won't just say content, putting more value on the internet is like, oh, well, the internet's becoming more important, and we can help people see things who are on the internet. And if you're on the internet, you're trying to get something, right? Whether it's a state change, entertainment, whatever it might be. So if you're not on the internet, you're not taking advantage of a massive vector in our culture and, the human civilization at the moment that is moving that direction.
Yeah. And that's okay if that's your goal. If your goal is to be, somebody who lives in the woods for their whole life, then
which is
that's
actually my goal.
Yeah, that's maybe a divergent vector, maybe not. I don't know.
Well, we can talk about that on a different podcast.
Maybe it's a vector that
they work around. Together. But so what I've not ignored is the fact that the internet is more important. So while I say end goal, it's not necessarily live in the woods, but it's certainly to not live in the middle of a city.
Yeah. Wait, I want a cabin right here where I can look out and see this.
Yes, sir.
Right?
Yes, sir. I've actually had one that wasn't that different. So I've already built it. So like getting to the place where you've achieved your goal. Well, did I stop there? No, I actually sold that cabin.
Yeah.
Right. And well, why? Well, because I actually wanted a relationship with, I wanted a family. Yeah. I wanted to be able to influence people more. And
new vectors.
I'll come back to a place like that in a better place, like in a better situation where even more of the things I value in my life, that I'm willing to trade stuff. So I traded that to get to a place where I have even more of what I want in that place again, or similar.
If you're listening, it's like a beautiful mountain picture. That's basically the way I can put it.
A little glade with flowers, and I had a lake on my property, and I was looking across Turnagain Sound, which is in Alaska, at 3 active volcanoes. Nice. It was pretty sweet, but I said I was alone. I had my 2 dogs, but
no humans.
There was very little human contact, right? Okay. And I was working online at the time. I was working digitally, right? I was doing GIS consulting. And so again, these were things, it's like, okay, Well, I'm kind of at the top of this peak, so to speak, right? And I now need to navigate back down to get on a better peak, so to speak, with more of the things in place that I want. So
Mm.
so whoever's listening to this, what I do know is you've got something, because you're listening or watching. Like
Yeah.
you got to have an iPhone or a computer or internet. Like
Yep.
you've got some stuff that you may need to say, okay, well, I'm going to use what I have to then get to a better place. And so that's really taking inventory of what you've got, understanding priorities, understanding vectors and the way things are moving, and starting to align more and more of them, which is like a force multiplier, so to speak, right? You're not ramming your head against the wall trying to make
Mhm.
more money as an organic farmer with no one around to buy your stuff. Like
Right.
that, it's like, okay, I'm full stuck here, right?
Yeah.
I've got to figure out some other things that I can do with what I have, which is not, it's incredibly valuable, but I've got to put some other factors in place which let me help more people and get myself in a better position at the same time, right?
So I've only got 5 more minutes. Maybe we have to do a part two, but we'll try to power through a few of these things because I think this is kind of important. So a really important concept that we've talked about before is sort of like excellent versus best, or whatever versus best. Don't be preoccupied to significant extent about like, oh, I got to have the best plan, or I've got to reach the best pinnacle. To me, I look for just excellent because it's hard. I don't really think, I think best is a little bit of a nonsense concept, except in the case of like super objective things, like the guy who's run the fastest 40
The
in
Olympics.
the world. Okay. Yeah. The
Yeah.
Olympics. That's pretty, you can be the best, right? Michael Jordan at the time, he was the best. I mean, it was kind of like, there's sometimes where you can be the argument. There's a lot of times though where it's like, okay, I'm going to be the best SEO. Well, what does that mean? Like, how do you even, like, what's the point? You just need to be excellent. You just need to be really good, I think, and just with your plan and individual goals. Do you have any further quick thoughts on this?
Yeah. So I used to work for the government. I was a park ranger, and I worked for the Bureau of Land Management and Colorado State Parks. And there was like this thing that nobody said, but everybody said, right? So you had to be careful who was in earshot when you said it. And it's called good enough for government work. And so you can kind of start to understand why that might rub people the wrong way.
Yeah.
But good enough is good enough, period.
Yeah.
I actually really, really like that.
Yeah. And I also, sometimes there's just certain thresholds you have to meet.
Yeah.
In order to, and then you can move on. And in fact, a lot of times you don't want to blow
I saw
over
thresholds on here. This is really what thresholds is about. Like you need to be good enough to get over that threshold. And sometimes you need to stay there. Okay. Then that's another factor, but it's about thresholds. And so good enough is really many times a better way to know what you're trying to achieve than best.
It can be more efficient.
Yeah.
Because with a threshold, there can be a lot of waste if you just like blow it out of the water. Yeah. Like you go camping and you need a certain amount of water, but you bring 10 times that. Well, then now it's actually kind of a downside, right? Because now you're logging around all this extra water or whatever. Yeah. You didn't meet the threshold.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so looking at threshold kind of equivocates in some ways to excellent. It's good enough. Like excellent and good enough are kind of the same thing.
There's definitely some overlap of intention there. I agree.
Yeah.
So be aware of that. I would like to talk more about that, maybe another one. And then we mentioned this before, also plan to test and pivot. So, you're going to kind of test your expectations, whatever you thought was going to happen, and you're going to need to pivot. That's just, every business pretty much needs to pivot. It's, you should plan for that. So that actually it's a little bit like planning for failure, but it's not really a failure. It's just more like, hey, there's going to be some unexpected things here, and be ready for it. And that's fine if you're not, if it's not, if you're not perfectly ready, that's why you pivot.
So plan to build so that you can pivot.
Yes, that's why focusing on the assets, skills, and relationships is so good. So even with some pivots in my business, I have the SEO skills, I have SEO assets, I have SEO relationships that I can tap into to pivot into those directions. that are still going to be useful and valuable, pretty much no matter what. My SEO skills, again, if assuming my assumption is correct that SEO is going to be around for a really long time, my SEO skills will continue to be valuable, even if things change.
So here's why SEO is going to continue to be extremely valuable for a long time, is because people already believe that they are right in what they want. So they are going to continue looking for this answer to the question that they believe is already right.
I could list a bunch of other reasons too, I think.
Yeah, well, yeah. Oh, I'm not saying that's the only reason. I'm just saying that reason's not going away anytime soon.
Right.
I would like it to. I would like people to be more inquisitive about challenging their assumptions of what's really important and true and good. But there's a lot of work to do to get there. And so, so the nature of that work is helping more people find things that help them see and challenge the assumption that they are already right about what the epitome, right, the peak of the thing that's going to make them best off in life is going to be. Until that point, we need to help more people find that stuff. And so that's how I
use the B word. How dare you?
I did it again.
It's just so integrated into our lexicon that it's hard to avoid.
And again, it's one of the reasons that I show up on different, podcasts. I've got my own. We've got the one I went with David, but the more that lexicon, which lexicon is just the words that you typically use in your own language, right? So, helping more people have those words that mean a certain thing to themselves. It won't always mean the exact same thing to somebody else. That's not really the point, but realizing that there is a concept which is important and that you should be using every day is a really big thing that I want to help other people have.
It's a building block.
We talk about building, right? So, okay. So now if more people are looking at their life and organizing it in terms of priorities, if more people are looking at building assets and things that they can trade value for, that's a good thing, period. I've achieved something, right? I've transferred some value.
Goodness. Bestness. We did have boundaries on here. I think this is along the threshold. I think is a type of boundary, but obviously it has its own meaning. But I think Fletch was talking about kind of setting your own boundaries, setting kind of not what other people set for you, but setting your boundaries. At least that's my understanding. Do you want to say something real quick about boundaries?
Yeah, boundaries and priorities are the way I organize what I do. Okay. So, at any given time, you're going to be focusing on one thing, unless you got some major brain issues, and I've experienced some of them, and I can understand how you can fully experience and be immersed in two different things. That's not what I'm talking about, right? What I'm talking about is that at any given time, you're going to be focused on one thing, whether it's brushing your teeth, whether it's writing a sales letter, whether it's trying to learn search engine optimization, whether it's trying to understand sales and marketing and conversion and sales copy and all that kind of thing. So you've got that as a priority. Is that the most important thing? Well, yes, when it is. But I also brush my teeth, and I also spend time with my family, and I also make sure that my health is not holding me back from being able to perform. So we have to look at focus and priorities, but those priorities have boundaries, because the priorities is plural. I won't ever say priority. I'm sure I have, and I probably will. So what I just said is actually wrong.
So don't listen to Fletch.
So don't listen to me, but now listen to me again.
Ever.
So yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. Make my fist at you. So that's kind of what we have to then consider, is that there are actually probably many things that are actually important to you. And so what you need to do is understand boundaries then. So when is brushing my teeth the most important thing? Mm-hmm. When I'm brushing my teeth, and at no other time.
Exactly.
So when is writing the sales letter the most important thing? When I'm writing the sales letter, that works and helps people understand what I'm, talking about and trying to, contribute value toward. But then when it's not, it's not. So being able to do this, like if you got a job, be in your job. That's the priority.
Right.
And then when it's, when you punch your ticket and you're out for the day, that no longer is the thing. So
Yeah.
like
drawing your
often,
appropriate boundary that
people, yeah, they go to work and they go get a beer afterwards and they talk about how bad the work is or how bad the job is, or they talk about other people or whatever. It's like, well, you don't have a clear boundary on that. That's not really now important to you. It doesn't need to be. You need to be really working on other things you can build. Right. And I think we, a lot of times, think we're building relationships and rapport and all that kind of thing. And you kind of are, but kind of in a negative way, right? In a way that where you're a bunch of like sob sisters, as a term that I got from, I think, Ayn Rand. But be able to turn a priority off when you're not working on it.
When it's
when it's not the thing that is most important for you to be working on.
Yeah. So define in your plan some boundaries, or try to just even loosely, I think is going to be helpful. So I do have to go. And maybe we'll touch on these other subjects in another podcast. Let us know if you want us to, or if you don't care. If you send me or Fletch an email saying, hey, I want you to talk about those things, then we're more likely to do that. But I do have a boundary that I need to enforce around this. So
this was most important while we were here, and now it's not going to be until.
And now it is not.
Time. Yes.
Well, thanks for listening, and we'll see you, or you'll hear us on the next podcast. Bye now.
Take care, guys. Bye.